So I thought maybe you could start by just introducing a little bit about how you got into what you're doing, and particularly how your childhood kind of started as reference points for that career as it developed.
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, I was always absolutely loved sport, came from a sports mad family, but probably wasn't gifted with the sporting talents to get me to the Olympics. So I thought probably the next best thing was to write about it. It sounds a cliche. I know lots of sports journalists say it, but genuinely, if I couldn't do professional sport, which clearly, sadly, I wasn't blessed with the skills to do that, it's just such a privilege to be able to cover it. But I think early on when I was young, it was just playing sports, lots of sports at school and in the school holidays. You know, my particular sport is show jumping, but, you know, my brothers were keen on sport as well. And just watching sport a lot as well. You know, the TV was probably 95% of the time showing sport at home. So it just really, my whole childhood was about sport, and then trying to carve my way into it as a career.
But you didn't read journalism at Bristol, did you?
No, and actually I see it as a real, you know, a real benefit that I didn't, to be honest. I studied geography, and then from there went and did a journalism master's. But during the whole course of my geography degree, I was trying to keep on top of gathering experience in journalism, whether that was on the student newspaper or doing some jobs for Planet Netball, which is a website I'm sure lots of you are familiar with, not. But I did that, and it really meant, by doing geography, it really kept it broad, and a lot of, you know, the places that I've worked since have never been a hindrance to me that I didn't study journalism as an undergrad, but definitely it was a really important one that I went on to do the master's.
So going from there up to the kind of where we are now, congratulations on the award that you so deservedly won. That award was for uncovering or leading the investigation into the Saracens salary cap scandal. I am no rugby fanatic myself. I'm sure there are those listening who are, and who would love the chance to hear your take on it. For those of you who don't know about this, this is essentially like the footballing equivalent of Man United under Alex Ferguson or City under Guardiola being caught cheating. In simple terms, how did the salary cap scandal unfold then?
Well, just for clarity, I also wasn't a rugby aficionado before I started uncovering it. So I definitely came at it. I don't think I'd ever covered a Premiership rugby match. I wasn't in rugby. I was a sports news reporter, but with a brief to doing investigations. Oh, that was my alarm to tell me to come on this call. Yeah, so I mean, my brief was investigations, and I had heard, like a lot of people in sport, about the rumours to do with Saracens, just because they had such a brilliant squad, so many England players. And I thought, well, at that point, I wasn't unbelievably busy. There were so many people who were so much more experienced than I was at the Mail, and I had a bit of time to really delve into it. And in the end, it came down to looking at land registry and Companies House. I'm a totally unashamed nerd and love my spreadsheets, and basically went through about 70 players past and present at Saracens, and using the electoral register looked at where they're living and the ownership of those houses, and came across some where the houses were owned by the players and Nigel Ray, the owner of Saracens. And then, but really the bit of the story that really made it a bigger deal than perhaps just the properties would have been was the company, the business arrangements. And that came through Companies House. And again, I wasn't totally, I'd never really touched Companies House much before starting this job. And in the end, came across some companies which were seemingly quite easy to find, but no one had done before.
So what's happened to Saracens now then, Laura?
So they got docked 35 points in November and fined £5 million. And then, because they were they were given a bit of an ultimatum, either they opened up their books for an audit of this season, or they accepted relegation. And it probably tells you quite a lot that they accepted relegation was the better option. But they have now been relegated, so they'll be in the Championship next season, which I think if you'd you tried to get odds of Saracens being in the Championship next season at the beginning of this one, I think you'd have got pretty good odds.
Well, just a little quick shout out. We've got a couple of people who've mentioned on here that they're diehard Saracens fans, whether it's, I think it's Luca Suto and also Percy Weston out there. You know, what would you say, Laura, it must be tricky, like being in a situation where you have slightly uncovered something which has caused a real nightmare for people out there. How does that sit with you as a journalist? Do you sleep fine at night? Is that ever a problem? And while you're thinking about your answer, I also just want to launch a poll for people out there to see how people feel about sports teams and their money, because we've got two options here really on this like sports salary thing. And I think it's an interesting dilemma that kids would be discussing at school a lot. Do you think sports teams in the same league should be able to pay people whatever they want? If they're rich, great. If they're not, their fault. Or do we think they should be restricted and have to follow a salary cap like they do in rugby?
Yeah, so I mean, it is a difficult one when you are delving into teams which people feel really strongly about, and I'm really aware of that. I know a lot of Saracens fans, and I've been to matches since, and I was a bit nervous about being sort of recognised in the crowd at Allianz Park, and sort of scuttled through with my head down. But I do think that I hope that sports fans, whether Saracens or otherwise, want sports administrators and owners and players and everyone involved in sport to be held to account. And that's very much, it was never an agenda against a particular club. It was very much trying to uncover something that was wrong and then leaving it to a really top independent panel of QCs to determine whether they were, in the wrong or not. And ultimately, no one really cared whether I thought they were wrong. It was up to a panel, and it took 8 months from our investigation being published to that verdict in November.
I think.
Before Walter asks his question, just to end that poll and see how it came out, it's actually quite a close result. I'm going to share those results now. 56% to 44%. We've had a lot of people out there who are listening now voting on this, and just looking at my screen, like, yes, most people think they should be restricted, but it's quite a close call. Some people aren't so sure about what makes things fair. So an interesting one. Anyway, Walter.
Well, we're going to have our quick fire round at the end of this interview. So for those who do have questions for Laura, do put them there. They're going to be to the point, difficult questions for Laura to answer, but we'll do that. I wanted Laura to ask about success. We had an Olympic rower on yesterday and an author on Monday, and to have achieved such success at such a young age is an amazing thing. Tom Fordyce, who's I think a colleague of yours, said it was the most remarkable scandal in the English game ever. To have that kind of story aged 27, is that difficult going forward? How do you contextualize success now, looking ahead to other things that you can write about?
It's a really interesting one, and I haven't spoken to that many people about the sort of aftermath, I suppose, of winning an award, and I actually found it really hard in the weeks after winning it. I think I felt that I was expected to be publishing and broadcasting on stories that were of that caliber week in, week out, and I kind of felt like the expectation on me massively increased as a result of it. Until then, I kind of floated a bit under the radar and kind of didn't really feel any pressure, because I've only been in sports journalism, at a really, national level for 2 years. And I would never say I've had success, and I wouldn't have ever say I know that you were sort of asking if I feel like I've made it, and I would never ever think that. As a journalist, you're only as good as your last story, and there are really low, moments where there's a lull and you don't have stories, and you're seeing other journalists with stories, and it's really, really hard. And I almost think that having won those awards, it almost makes it harder for me, because I feel that sort of pressure and weight of expectation.
Great. Well, I'm gonna now move to the audience, and there's some brilliant questions. There's lots and lots, hundreds of comments. I'm gonna go with Georgie, age 11. She says, "Do you have any sport role models, Laura? Do you have any sport role models?"
Yes, I do. I'm a particular fan of Andy Murray, but not as a fan. I don't think as a journalist you can't really be a fan of anyone. But I really admire his tenacity and drive. I really have so many, but yes, I definitely have sporting role models, I think it's really important, but I think there's a real clear distinction, especially at somewhere like the BBC, where we have to be impartial between having sort of role models but not being a fan, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Great question from the Khan family. What do you think makes good sports journalism?
Well, to be a good sports journalist, I think basically hard work. I've never known people work harder than my colleagues in sports journalism, but I think to be a good sports journalist, you have to have the willingness to really delve deeply into issues, but also hold people to account. I think for me, that's what we do week in, week out. We hold people to account and make sure that we're, trying to promote the integrity of sport.
Another question, what about your toughest moments in sports journalism?
Oh, that is a good one. I think sometimes I found it difficult as a female sports journalist. There aren't that many of us. At the Daily Mail, I was, I think, one of 2 female sports journalists in the department. There really aren't that many in print, more so in broadcast. But I think sometimes, if I'm the only woman in a room, that can be really difficult. And I've sometimes felt that it's sort of sometimes acted against me, but I see it as a really important role that I have to show that I am every bit as good as my male counterparts. But sometimes that has been a difficult thing for me.
Laura, you speak so eloquently about your upbringing in sport, and then going to university, you didn't do journalism. As you know, this is a mentoring business. We're big believers in formalizing the role of mentors in children's lives. Did you have a mentor growing up, professionally now or personally through your teenage years?
I definitely have had so many personal mentors, my parents being 2 of the main ones for me in terms of sort of inspiring that work ethic. But I didn't have anyone in journalism. I really didn't know anyone in the industry. And that made it really difficult to get ins, because if you don't know anyone and to get work experience on a national newspaper or in broadcast, I know how hard it is. So I've made it, really big part of my career to be involved in any mentoring schemes I can be involved in. And it's been a real pleasure for me to have mentored 2 female journalists and try and help them get into sport. But I really think identifying a mentor early on in journalism is a really important one, because it can, it's a bad bit of the industry, but it can be really hard to get into the newsroom, into TV studios. It can be really hard. So just try really hard to identify a mentor, speak to anyone you know. I'm more than happy to try and be a point of sort of any advice or guidance going forward, but I really think identifying one early can be really valuable.
That's good advice. And I think that sense of like having to track down and find mentors and find people who are role models for you, not waiting for them to arrive at your door. I think that's really good advice generally. A quick one here, and then Walter can have a question too. This is from Azaria, who's 7 years old. She asks, how do you find a new story when you finished another?
Gosh, sorry, that's a very good question. And it really is hard to find stories. I think it's just monitoring. I mean, social media is a big part of my job, Twitter being probably the main one for me, and just reading the papers, speaking to lots of people. I ring my contacts on a daily, if maybe weekly basis, just trying and getting information out of them and keeping abreast of meetings that are going on among sports governing bodies, trying to get interviews. You get really good news lines from interviews.
We're going to play our 5-question, whatever, we're going to quick fire round. There we go, in a second. So I hope if you have any sort of yes or no, either or questions, do ask Laura in the chat box. I wanted to ask one question. We've spoken a lot about sport. How did working in the Daily Mail compare to working at the BBC?
Yeah, I mean, they are pretty different establishments, that has to be said. I think for me, I mean, I went into showbiz at the Mail, which really my friends will know I'm not someone that knows all the celebrity gossip. I can't even still name the Kardashians, but having that grounding of working in an area that probably wasn't my comfort zone was really important. And to be honest, I know that a lot of people will have their own views of the Daily Mail, but it was the best grounding I could have had and really honed my news sense. And then the BBC, I mean, I have to be so careful of not having an opinion on air. No, you know, I have to be so straight down the line of reporting, never giving an opinion. And that can be really, you know, I probably didn't realise the opinions I subtly gave in written pieces at the Daily Mail, and I just can't do that at the BBC.
Very good. Right, Laura, our quick fire round to finish. Keep playing. We are playing Biscuit Face, Max or Leo. Do look out for that in a second. Right, there are 5 questions then that I'm going to ask, which I've taken from the Q&A. And unless it affects your job, you're going to have to give us an answer. So, question 1, Claire Balding or Gary Lineker?
Gary Lineker.
Maro Itoje or Owen Farrell is a better rugby player?
Maro Itoje.
Tom or Jack Lambert as a better sportsman?
That's so hard. They're my brothers. Tom Lambert.
Pen or paper when writing stories?
Pen.
Interesting. And the Daily Mail or the BBC?
The BBC.
Fantastic. We love your honesty. That is awesome. I know everyone else will too. Right, Laura, the last thing, again, from the sublime to the ridiculous, we are going to play Biscuit Face. So I have my biscuit. Laura, what biscuit have you chosen?
It's a milk chocolate hobnob.
Fantastic.
Other biscuit providers are available.
Now, just for everyone to see out there, I'll explain a little about the leadership board. We're getting, you know, we're 3 days in now, so I realize it's not the biggest Top Gear board, but we've got Lamorna on 32. Constantine didn't even manage this. Walter got 28 seconds, and I am currently in the lead on 25, which means I'm sitting the day out, and I'm going to let Walter try and beat my score. So I will be officiating. You have a maximum of 30 seconds. Once you go over 30 seconds, the game ends, because no one wants to see that. At home, we encourage you to do this as long as you possibly can. If you can get a video of it, if you can Instagram it, if you can tag us at Oppidan Education, there is a packet of biscuits for the best time this week. So, you know what? We're even happy to consider what type of biscuits you're interested in, if you do well enough. So I'm getting my timer out, biscuits at the ready. If you need it a bit smaller, Laura, because I'm not being rude, but you have a slightly smaller face than that biscuit looks like it's able to handle.
I'm going to try it.
If you wish to have a slightly smaller biscuit on your face, you would be welcome. Right. We have 30 seconds starting now. Oh my God. No way.
Ah, no!
Oh, keep going, keep going, keep going. Well there, she's done well. You got one more go, one more go.
No,
You know what? I'm disappointed for you, but you've done a valiant effort. I did warn you about the size of the chocolate digester.
I know, it just kept on. Oh God, right.
Also, how big was your biscuit?
Half a digestive. Laura, you can't be good at writing and Biscuit Face. Thank you. Thank you so much for appearing on Oppidan Talks.
And Walter, I'm gutted to say, I think that puts you in the lead. What was that? I think that was about 15 seconds or so. It was maybe 12 even.
Well, then time spent at the supermarket was worth it, eh?
I know, now I know what he's doing all day. Laura, we're so grateful. Thank you. It's been absolutely fantastic talking to you. I know that there are more questions we haven't answered on here, but I'm delighted we've got through so many of them. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. Thank you to Laura. We look forward to seeing you soon. And keep an eye on her career because it's going places.